40 minutes. That's how much warning I got before my own mother's funeral started, and it didn't come from my sister. It came from a text meant for someone else. My mother's estate was worth $310,000. For 12 years, the will splitting it between me and my sister Carol sat untouched in a drawer at my old law office. 6 weeks before she died, that changed. And Carol knew exactly why she needed me still catching my breath instead of sitting in that church. If you've ever been the one who was always there, and watched the family history get rewritten anyway, stay with me. Because the will reading was never about who mourned the loudest. It was about who my mother actually trusted at the end. My name is Maggie Callahan. I spent 28 years as a legal secretary for the attorney who drew up that will. And when my sister tried to bury the truth along with our mother, I already knew exactly where to look. The text came from my cousin Denise. See you at the church at 2, sending love. I was standing in my kitchen in sweatpants when it landed, at 1:20 in the afternoon, and for 3 full seconds I thought she had the wrong number. Then I understood. I called Carol. Straight to voicemail. I called the church. A volunteer answered, kind and a little confused, and told me the Callahan service was already seating family. I drove there in the clothes I had on, my hands shaking too hard to work the buttons on anything nicer, and I walked into the back pew of my mother's funeral 11 minutes after it started, while my sister sat in the front row like nothing in the room was missing. The organ was already 3 verses into a hymn my mother had picked out herself, years before, in a folder marked, just in case, that she kept in her nightstand. I knew that folder. I'd seen it a dozen times. I sat in a pew meant for people who barely knew her, in the clothes I did yard work in, and mouthed along to a song my own mother had chosen, because I couldn't make my voice work. If this has ever happened to you, if a family member has ever managed you right out of a moment that was supposed to be yours, tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how many of us have sat in that back pew. Carol found me in the parking lot afterward, sunglasses on, voice already smoothing itself into the tone she uses when she's decided a conversation is over before it starts. I left you messages, she said. I didn't want to overwhelm you with all the details this week. I checked my phone right there, in front of her. 5 days of call history. Nothing from my sister. Not one missed call, not one voicemail. There's nothing here, Carol. I'm sure it went through, she said, already turning toward her car. I was just trying to keep things simple for everyone. She said that phrase, keep things simple, the way she always says it, both hands smoothing the front of her blazer flat, like she's ironing the sentence before she hands it to you. I'd heard her say it 100 times over the 2 years she'd been managing our mother's care. I used to think it meant she was tired. That afternoon, standing in a church parking lot in the wrong shoes, I started wondering what it actually meant. Simple for who, Carol? I asked. She didn't answer. She got in her car. Denise caught up to me by my car, phone already out. Wait, you didn't get the group text. She showed me the thread. 4 days old. 15 names. Aunts, cousins, a second cousin I'd met exactly twice, all of them told the time, the church, the reception afterward at the VFW hall. My name wasn't in the thread. Not removed, never added. I figured Carol had you on a separate call or something, Denise said, and I watched her realize, in real time, that she'd just handed me proof of something neither of us wanted to be true. I'm so sorry, Maggie. I really thought you knew. She kept saying it, 3 or 4 times, like repeating it might undo the 4 days. 15 people knew for 4 days. I found out with 40 minutes to spare, from a woman who assumed I already knew. This wasn't an accident. Accidents don't take 4 days and 15 names to build. Subscribe to this channel if stories like this one feel familiar to you. where the truth in a family gets rewritten by whoever's holding the paperwork first. I tell these stories because too many of us find out too late exactly how far that can go. I want you to hold on to that number, for days, because it's going to matter again before this is over. I didn't say anything else to Carol that day. I drove home, sat in my car in my own driveway for a long time, and did the thing I've done since I was 22 years old and started working for a small estate attorney named Walter Pruitt. I made a list of what I actually knew, instead of what I felt. What I knew was small. My mother had died on a Tuesday. My sister had managed her care for 2 years, the doctor visits, the medication schedule, the accounts. I had visited every week, sometimes twice, but Carol was the one who called it, handling everything, in the tone people use when they want credit and distance in the same sentence. What I felt was bigger than the list. But feelings don't win anything. Documents do. That's not a lesson I learned that day. It's one I spent half my life learning at a desk outside Walter Pruitt's office. I went inside eventually. I stood in the kitchen where I'd gotten Denise's text 6 hours earlier and looked at the calendar on my fridge, where I still had my mother's Thursday appointment written in, out of habit, from a week she was already gone for. Emma called that night to check on me. I almost didn't tell her about the 40 minutes, the text, the back pew. It felt small next to the fact that her grandmother was gone at all. But she got quiet on the phone in a way that told me she already sensed something was wrong before I said a word, and by the time I finished, she was the one who said it out loud first. That doesn't sound like an accident, Mom. I told her I wasn't sure yet. I was, already. I just wasn't ready to say it. The next morning I called Yolanda. She'd been my mother's hospice aide for the last 4 months, a quiet, precise woman who used to time her visits so she and I would overlap on Thursdays, so I could ask her the questions Carol never had patience for. I wanted to thank you, I told her. For everything you did for Mom. There was a pause on the line, long enough that I almost filled it. She talked about you a lot, those last weeks, Yolanda said. She kept saying, make sure Maggie knows. She'll understand. Knows what? Another pause. I assumed you already did. Carol told me not to call you directly about anything, she said. Maggie already knows everything, don't worry her. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and felt something shift that I couldn't name yet. My mother had been trying to reach me, in her own way, through a hospice aide, in her last conscious week, and my sister had quietly closed that door before it opened. I asked Yolanda if she remembered anything else. She said Ruth had mentioned the papers twice, in the same breath both times, and both times looked toward the hallway closet where she kept her important folders, not the nightstand folder marked, just in case, a different one, further back, that Yolanda had never opened. Yolanda hadn't thought much of it at the time. She'd had 4 other patients that week. I couldn't stop thinking about it for the rest of the day. She wasn't scared, near the end, Yolanda added, before we hung up. Just impatient. Like there was something she still needed to finish and she was running out of time to do it. I've thought about that sentence more than almost anything else anyone said to me that week. I called Pruitt and Associates that afternoon for a reason that had nothing to do with any of this. I wanted to ask about the funeral flower arrangement the firm had sent, whether it needed to be picked up or if the florist handled that. Old habit. I'd worked there 28 years, I still knew half the staff by name, and most of them still greeted me like I'd left on a Friday instead of 6 years ago. The new receptionist, a young woman named Priya, pulled up the file to check the delivery note and said, almost as an afterthought, "Oh, and I have you both down for 4 o'clock today. Is that still good?" Mrs. Bennet confirmed for the family. I went very still. 4 o'clock for what, Priya? The will reading, she said. It's on the calendar for this afternoon. Nobody had told me there was a will reading. Nobody had told me there was a meeting at all. My sister had confirmed a time, for the family, on a day she'd already made sure I could barely stand up straight from grief and confusion, and she'd done it at my own former office, where I still knew enough people to find out anyway. Here's the part I want you to really sit with, because it's the part that changed how I understood everything that came before it. Carol didn't just want me out of the funeral. She wanted me gone before the reading, still reeling, easy to talk over, easy to explain around. I hung up with Priya and called Janet instead. Janet and I had worked the same hallway for 19 years before I retired, different desks, same file cabinets, same understanding of when a question needed answering quietly instead of officially. I asked her, flat out, what was on my mother's file. She was quiet for a second. Maggie, I'm not supposed to, I know, I said. I'm asking anyway. There's a new will, Janet said. Filed about 6 weeks before she passed. It replaced the one from 2014. 12 years. The will I'd known about my whole adult life, the one that split the house and everything else evenly between me and Carol, had been quietly retired 6 weeks before my mother died, and nobody had said a word to me about it. I didn't sleep much that night. Not from grief this time, grief I could have carried. This was something colder, working itself out piece by piece. The 2014 will gave me and Carol the house and the rest of the estate straight down the middle, $310,000, split evenly, the way it had always been assumed it would go, the way both of us had joked about for years without either of us really thinking about it. If the new will changed it enough that Carol stood to lose something real, that would explain every single thing she'd done in the last 5 days. Not grief. Not overwhelm. Math. Janet wouldn't read me the new will's terms outright, that wasn't hers to give me, and I respected that more than I wanted to admit in the moment. But she confirmed enough. The house, and the majority of the estate, now went to me. I was named executor. My mother had made that decision on her own, 6 weeks before she died, with our 2 years of Thursday visits sitting right there in front of her the whole time she was deciding. Carol wasn't protecting me from grief. Carol was protecting $40,000 in a piano, if the new will held, because that's what would be left for her if it did. If it didn't hold, if she could make it look invalid, the old split still stood. $155,000, easy, just for making enough people believe our mother wasn't herself at the end. I want you to remember one more name, Dr. Osei. Because he's the reason none of what Carol tried to do was ever going to work. I didn't confront my sister that night. I did the thing I'd spent 28 years teaching other people to do, back when they sat across the desk from me panicking about exactly this kind of thing. I stopped reacting and started building. The courthouse downtown keeps probate filings in a records office on the 2nd floor, a room I hadn't stood in since I retired, though the smell of it, old paper and the particular hum of the copy machine, hadn't changed at all. As a named party to the estate, I was entitled to request a certified copy of the filed will, and the clerk barely looked up from her screen before printing it, stamping it, and sliding it across the counter like it was nothing. $11. 4 pages. My mother's actual signature on the last one, dated 6 weeks before she died, in handwriting steadier than mine was that morning. Then I called Dr. Osei's office, the physician who'd been treating my mother for 11 years, and asked, plainly, whether he'd done any kind of capacity evaluation around the time the new will was signed. He had. For days before Ruth signed that will, Dr. Osei had documented, in writing, that she was lucid, oriented, and under no pressure that he could observe. He told me himself, over the phone, that he'd done it because Pruitt's office had asked him to, standard practice for a will written that late in someone's life, nothing unusual, nothing anyone had to request twice. Carol had never mentioned that letter existed. I don't think she knew it did. For days before signing, a doctor confirms she knows exactly what she's doing. 6 weeks before dying, she puts it in writing. And for 5 days after her funeral, my sister tells anyone who'll listen that our mother wasn't herself near the end. I drove to the house on Larkspur Lane that same afternoon, still my mother's, still hers on paper, though someone had already boxed up the kitchen towels. The hallway closet Yolanda mentioned was exactly where I remembered it, behind the winter coats nobody wore anymore. The folder my mother kept mentioning wasn't there. Carol had beaten me to it, or had it already, or had never needed to look because she already knew what was in it. What was still there, further back on the shelf, was a shoebox Carol clearly hadn't bothered with, old birthday cards I'd sent over the years, a stack of receipts, and one photograph of the two of us at my law school graduation, 28 years ago, before I'd ever heard Walter Pruitt's name. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, the one I never had to remind. I stood in that hallway longer than I meant to. Then I took the shoebox home with me and left everything else exactly where it was. I had what I needed by that Thursday, the certified will, Dr. Osei's capacity letter, and Yolanda's account of my mother's exact words. 3 separate people, 3 separate documents, all saying the same thing from 3 directions Carol couldn't control. I could have called her that night and read it all back to her over the phone. Some nights I wanted to. I didn't. I've watched enough families destroy each other over a phone call to know that confrontation doesn't undo anything, it just makes the fight louder. What I had wouldn't get louder by shouting. It would get clearer by waiting. I showed Emma everything the night before the reading, laid out on my kitchen table like evidence for a case I'd never wanted to build, the certified will, the capacity letter, a page of notes in my own handwriting connecting dates I never expected to need. My daughter sat there a long time before she said anything. Why didn't Grandma just tell you herself? I didn't have an answer for a second. Then I realized, she had. Through Yolanda, through a hallway closet she kept looking toward, through a new will she signed and quietly let sit in a file, trusting it would speak when she couldn't anymore. She did tell me, I said. I just didn't know how to hear it yet. Emma asked if I was scared. I told her the truth, that I wasn't, not anymore. I'd spent 5 days being managed, being timed, being talked around. Tomorrow, for the first time since that text from Denise landed in my kitchen, I would be the one who knew what was coming, and Carol wouldn't. I got to Pruitt and Associates 20 minutes early and sat in my car in the same parking lot where Carol had told me she was keeping things simple 5 days earlier. Same lot, same cracked asphalt near the second row, different version of me sitting in it. I'd traded the wrong shoes and shaking hands for a folder on the passenger seat with tabs I'd labeled myself, the night before, out of old habit. I sat there until exactly 4 o'clock, then walked in. Pruitt and Associates hadn't changed the conference room in 20 years, same long table, same water pitcher nobody ever poured from. I sat across from Carol, who wore the same composed face she'd worn in that parking lot. She opened before Walter Pruitt could even start. Before anything's read, I think we should talk about Mom's state of mind at the end. She wasn't always herself those last few weeks. Walter didn't even look up from the folder. The firm has a properly executed will on file, filed 6 weeks before Ruth's passing, with a physician's capacity assessment attached from 4 days prior. I'll be reading that document today. I watched something behind Carol's eyes recalculate in real time. That assessment I wasn't aware there was an assessment, she said. There is, I said. I have a certified copy. So does the court. Carol tried the family angle next. I only did what I thought was right, keeping things calm during the funeral. I was protecting this family from a fight. You weren't protecting anyone from a fight, I said. You were trying to have this meeting before I could get here with anything in my hands. She turned to the room instead of to me. I was the one who was actually there, at the end. Ask anyone. Maggie visited when it was convenient. My cousin, sitting near the door, spoke up before I could. She was there every Thursday, Carol. Twice some weeks. I saw her car there myself. Yolanda had said the same thing to me the day before, unprompted, that the visitor log at the house showed Maggie's name more than anyone else's, including Carol's, those last 2 months. Carol didn't have anywhere to put that. The room went quiet enough that I heard the water pitcher sweat onto the table. "I didn't think you'd actually come," Carol said, quiet, almost to herself, like the sentence had slipped out before she could stop it. That was the whole thing, right there. Not grief. Not overwhelm. She hadn't planned for me to walk in prepared. She'd planned for me to walk in exhausted, confused, and easy to talk over, and I hadn't given her that version of me. Walter read the will exactly as it was written. The house at 411 Larkspur Lane, and the majority of the estate, to me, named executor. $40,000 and Ruth's piano to Carol, not erased, not forgotten, just told the truth about in proportion to what our mother actually knew about the last 2 years. The line that undid me wasn't the dollar figure. It was the sentence right before it, to my daughter Margaret, who never made me ask twice. My cousin exhaled audibly across the table. Someone else murmured something about how much time I'd actually spent those last 2 years, compared to how much Carol had posted about spending it. Carol didn't say anything else. There wasn't anything left that would have helped. She looked, for the first time since I'd known her as an adult, like someone who hadn't planned for a version of this conversation where she didn't have the last word. I didn't gloat. I want to be honest about that, because it would have been easy, and for about 10 seconds in that conference room, it would have felt good. I left Carol's $40,000 and the piano exactly where the will put them. I could have challenged even that, out of anger, and probably could have made it stick given everything else on the table. I didn't. My mother decided what Carol got to keep, and some decisions aren't mine to improve on just because I finally had the power to. In the weeks after, Carol and I spoke maybe twice, both times short, both times civil in the way people are when there's nothing left to fight over. She kept the piano. I heard she sold it within the month. Denise still calls me every Sunday, the way she always has, and this past Sunday she told me the whole family had started calling it the Thursday will, without anyone deciding to, just because that's what it was. Emma asked me once, a few weeks later, if I missed having a sister. I told her the truth. I missed the sister I'd thought I had, back before any of this, the one from before Carol started managing our mother instead of just helping her. That sister might not have existed the way I remembered her. I'm still deciding what to do with that. That night, back home, I finally played the one voicemail from my mother I'd been avoiding for 2 weeks, saved on my phone since before she went into hospice. Her voice was thinner than I remembered, but steady. Maggie. I know you'll take care of things right, the way you always have. You never made me ask twice. I sat with that sentence a long time. 7 words. No speech, no explanation, nothing that needed defending in a conference room. I put the shoebox from the hallway closet on the shelf in my own front hall, where I see it every time I leave the house now. Not a trophy. Just a photograph of the 2 of us at my graduation, and 4 words in my mother's handwriting on the back, the one I never had to remind. If you've ever spent years being the reliable one while somebody louder got the credit for it, the paperwork isn't always what proves it. Sometimes it's 4 words on the back of a photograph. What did your family's version of keeping things simple cost you? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. Thank you for listening.